The Ogadeni, a region of Somalia, has been a source of conflict since the area was ceded to Ethiopia by the British in 1954. Somalia has twice unsuccessfully fought wars with Ethiopia to get it back. The Ethiopian government has banned aid agencies and journalists from accessing the region. And as we speak, there are reports of famine and genocide in the area. This week, Africa Today focuses on the Ogadeni, asking, is the $7 billion of Western aid to Ethiopia helping to fuel genocide?
The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, has been accused of genocide in Ethiopia's Somali region, Ogadeni. The region has been experiencing severe droughts with millions facing famine. Mr. Zenawi's government has barred most aid agencies from operating there. The International Red Cross also expressed its frustration after it was denied a license to do relief work in the region. Most of Ogadeni's people are of the Somali ethnic group, and critics believe this is the reason for the region's isolation by the Ethiopian government. They also believe Western aid of about $7 billion a year has strengthened Mr. Zenawi's cause, while these allies have turned a blind eye on the alleged genocide. This week, Africa Today looks at the role the West is playing in funding the regime and whether the funds are fueling the genocide in Ogadeni.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Today. I'm Vuiswang Ngobongwana, and this week we're zooming in on the Ogadeni, a remote Somali region of Ethiopia. This is an oil-rich region where there are reports of famine and an ongoing genocide allegedly committed by a militia created by the Ethiopian government. Ethiopia, of course, is a friend of the West in its war on terror, but is the West, consciously or otherwise, funding a genocide against the Ogadeni? Here with me to share their extensive knowledge of the region and to help us answer that question are Mr. Negusi Gama, an Ethiopian exiled journalist, Richard Chutezo, a journalist and writer, and from Asmara on the telephone we're welcoming Mr. Thomas C. Mountain, an independent journalist. Thank you all so much for joining us on Africa Today. Thank you. If I could start with you, Thomas, there in Asmara on the phone. We mentioned in our introduction that there seems to be very little journalistic access to the area, and we understand you actually broke the story. Could you tell us what the situation is as we speak?
Well, the United Nations Famine Early Warning System has said that due to drought, millions of Ethiopians in the Ogadeni are facing starvation. Like you said, the International Committee for the Red Cross has said that they've been denied access to the region to provide food aid to these people for the fourth year in a row. Now, like you said, IMF has said that Ethiopia exports 1.7 billion and imports 8.7 billion. It's $7 billion in aid funding all of this. Now, they can't say they don't know, because Gail Smith, the senior policy advisor to Barack Obama's White House, was writing about this when she was head of the Enough Project in 2007, 2008. So they know about this. In a moment of desperation, I sent an email to the Los Angeles Times reporter in Addis Ababa about this, and their response was, well, they can't cover it because of logistics and access problems. So they know about this. They're funding this. Right. And they're doing it.
Okay, Thomas, thank you for that. I mean, Negusi, you're familiar with this foreign policy type of contradiction where, you know, the US and as well as other Western nations always, you know, promote themselves as advocates of human rights. But whenever it comes to African situations in particular, there seems to be a lot of contradictions. I mean, how would you summarize this kind of contradiction as we speak of the Ogadeni today?
Yeah, the problem is the Western countries, most of the time, they're always after their own interest. If they do have an interest in a particular case, you know, they don't give any attention and regard to the civilian society as a whole and to that country.
Well, going back to the history, could you explain to our viewers who may not know the full history, what was the thinking of the British when they gave the Ogaden to Ethiopia? I mean, the Ogaden has always been a part of Somalia, hasn't it?
No. Look, the British usually, whenever, in all the colonies that British have been, you know, whenever they demark later on when they leave or give an independence to that nation, they usually demarcate it I mean, they leave a problem behind them.
Okay.
And it wasn't clear.
Sure.
Not only in our case, it's only, we do have a problem with Sudan as well.
Same
now
sort
they are
of thing.
claiming, they are claiming land, and you know, there is no clear demarcation, and because of that, you know, the Somalis, they do have this. They also have the 5-star, you know, Somalis. They claim land from Ethiopia, from Kenya, from Djibouti. These situations are there. But the problem, you know, came to such situation because the government in Ethiopia do not recognize, you know, the interest of the people. It abuses human rights. It violates, you know, politically. The Somalis are suppressed, and this is actually a true fact towards all the Ethiopian areas. If you go to Afar, to Gambela, wherever.
This is a pattern, a recurring pattern.
A minority ethnic group is ruling the country, and it's getting the support of the West in order to go through all these atrocities.
Okay, let's move on. I mean, if I could bring you in, Richard.
Yes.
It's a scenario that is painfully familiar, as we've said. You know, almost nearly 60 years of conflict caused by a very casual demarcation of a border. You know, now, as far as you are aware about the region, you're an independent analyst. What are your thoughts on the nature of this conflict and where it might lead to? What is the nature of this conflict from your perspective?
Well, to start with, you know, Neguse said something that it really pains, you know, everyone who is an African, myself included, you know, that, you know, from the time of the partition of Africa, whether by design or by some chance, you know, Africa was always going to afterwards, you know, live in serious problems because groups of, you know, ethnic, you know, minorities or majorities were separated, you know, and placed with different geographical states. And that in itself was sowing the seeds of future discord, you know, as we're seeing today.
Well, this has been exacerbated by the finding of oil in the region as well.
Yes, and you'd find that everywhere that there's been the finding of oil, there's a similar scenario that happened in West Africa in the Bakassi Peninsula, where between Nigeria and Cameroon, a piece of land, the Bakassi Peninsula, was left idle for many years, and then all of a sudden oil was discovered. And then the two countries started fighting, you know, over ownership of that piece of land. And everybody will go back to the partition of Africa, to United Nations, to whatever documents existed in the past. But the one thing I want to say is that I think, you know, as Africans, we got to sit back. We have to sit back and take stock of our past, our present, and then look at where we want to be in the future. We can't always sit back and hope that, you know, we'll bring in foreign allies to come and solve problems for us, because, you know, it's never happened. You know, America will always have American interests. Britain will always protect British interests.
Right.
We have to learn how to protect Ethiopian interests, Somalian interests, African interests, and I think this is where our leaders are failing the African people.
Right. I mean, if I could bring you back in, Thomas, first before you make a comment, I'd like to make it clear to our viewers that we did seek comment and participation from the Ethiopian government, but they informed us that they do not make comments. So we're not getting their perspective, and that's the only reason you're not hearing their perspective. But Thomas, if I could bring you in on this, as someone who is from America, it's the US are being portrayed as the main villain in this piece, in this scenario, so to speak. How do you feel about how they are dealing with the contradiction, or are they not dealing with the contradiction at this point in time?
Well, Ethiopia, the Meles Zenawi regime in Ethiopia is the Western gendarme or policeman on the beat, the enforcer in East Africa. Their job is to do the dirty work for the West, and the West can hold up its hands and say, our hands are clean. So, these crimes that are being committed in the Ogaden, there's an insurgency going on there. The West is very concerned, especially the United States, about the fact that the Meles Zenawi regime is increasingly shaky. They're widely hated by the people of the country. The $7 billion a year is the only thing keeping them in power. So, the West wants to keep Meles Zenawi in power because that's their enforcer. That's the guy that's doing their dirty work for them to keep control of East Africa. So this is what's really behind this genocide. There's an insurgency. The Ogaden National Liberation Front is fighting an insurgency against the Ethiopian government. I guess the policy is, if you can't catch the fish, drain the lake. I mean, that's why this genocide is happening, because the West is supporting it because it's keeping Meles Zenawi in power, and that's what they're desperate to keep